talking about conscious manifestation, it's that the present moment is where the infinite potential exists, right? And so the more that we are trying to rely on the known, trying to rely on our analytical mind, trying to manipulate reality, the more we're trying to do that, the more we are blocking ourselves from the potential of what exists in the quantum, from the infinite potential of what is trying to meet us. And I also think love and trying to articulate that, it's going to be a different sensation in everybody's body. Like we can point to it in the world or when we feel it or when we see it. And I think inquiring, like in this part of the formula of moving from fear to love, when you've brought up or uncovered, shown the spotlight on the fear, then you get to step into that somatic sensation in your body of what love is.
I think love is the most powerful hallucinogen, and it was falling in love that awakened the spirituality within me. That's when I really started to have these other experiences. That's when I had visions that guided me towards spaces like the center, where I learned how to meditate, continued having visionary experiences.
As I started to have mystical experiences, I was just so determined to figure out, okay, why is this happening? How can this be happening? Because if we answer those questions, if we can answer those questions, I think it helps us to answer more around the nature of our reality and why we're here. I think it's all interconnected. Welcome to SoulPod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. I'm your guide, Crystal Cassidy, and together we will bridge the seen and the unseen, science and spirituality, the practical and the profound. From quantum physics to energy centers, near-death experiences to extraterrestrial contact, join us as we delve into the mysteries of consciousness and journey together towards a more awakened, compassionate, and soul-connected world. Find your seat, drop in, and let's go on a journey together.
What is a spiritual awakening? I think that's a big question, and it's a very deep conversation on its own. So, Kat, maybe what do you think a spiritual awakening is?
Yeah, I love or have loved thinking about this question and thinking about conceptualizing what is going on when we talk about a spiritual awakening. And I think the most foundational description is what SoulPod's mission is that process of moving from fear to love. And that whole initiation that starts in the willingness to move from fear to love.
The SoulPod mission, fear to love, that's why we're here. That's what we're all about. And it sounds simple, but it's so involved, going from this consciousness of limitation to more and more possibility as you awaken. You mentioned the word initiation, which I think is very potent when you're talking about the awakening journey. And I think we're always awakening. I also think that there's times in our life when we have increased opportunity to take those initiations deeper. So it's an offering. And however that shows up in your life, sometimes through suffering, sometimes through joy. It can be unconscious and spontaneous. It can be conscious and very intentional. And you have these different points that maybe your soul has planned for, where you can really take that awakening journey further. I was just talking to somebody recently. They're in this initiation point in their journey, and they know they're in it. They know they're being asked to go deeper. They're feeling fear about it because they can feel the unknown asking them to meet it. And that can be scary. But I love that the word awakening is a verb. So it's a process. It's a becoming. It's like the river of your life. You have all these twists and turns, and you're awakening at different speeds at different times. You're hitting plateaus, which can also be very potent. But when we think about the energy centers, and a lot of the work we do in SoulPod is helping you really harmonize those energy centers through your awakening process. But our first center is all about finding that safety. It can be more challenging to initiate the awakening process when you don't feel safe, physically, in the world, in your body. So each center has its invitation as you bring that energy up, up, and up. And you can hit all kinds of, or you will hit all kinds of lessons along the way. But I do view this journey of awakening as being not just in this lifetime, but a continuous, infinite one. You're always becoming more and more whole.
And I think there are also like synonymous ways of talking about spiritual awakening, because when I think about it, it's synonymous with healing. It's synonymous with raising your consciousness. It's synonymous with really being available to presence. So many of these invitations that you're talking about are truly an invitation for us to be totally present in our bodies. Mm-hmm. And it requires that sense of safety in self, of like, no matter what I encounter, no matter what magnitude of emotion I encounter, no matter what magnitude of fear, shame, whatever it is that I am met with, I'm safe enough to experience that in my body. With that comes a zooming out, right? Despite the fear, despite the shame, I am inherently worthy. Like, all of those are huge milestones, but also requirements within the spiritual awakening process or the healing process. Essentially, remembering the truth of who you are. It's similar to that verb of awakening. What came through early in my spiritual journey was just like on repeat. It was like a mantra that came through. I had this opening, and remember the truth came through with just over and over again. That verb of like remembering, that feels like a lot of what the spiritual awakening process is. It's a remembering that we are inherently worthy, we're inherently divine, despite any of the shame, despite any of the fear, uncertainty, all of the crunchiness of the human experience. Zooming out from that and returning to the truth of our perfection, of our power, that peacefulness that exists outside of all the crunchiness, feels like what the spiritual awakening process is inviting us to step back into.
I love that. Yeah, I think a lot of times we get maybe confused that spiritual awakening is becoming something that you're not yet. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what you're talking about, I think, is very important, which is you're actually becoming what you are already inherently. You're becoming more and more whole. This is inherent to who it is that you are. So I think the term remembering is so powerful, because you're remembering like, oh, this is what love, like beyond relationship love, remembering of our connection to everything that is. When you have those big moments, it's giving you this, at first, maybe temporary exposure to a whole new way of being, which I think we can also call moments of enlightenment, where the light comes in and it shows you that both of which was hidden, which is also your wholeness. And now you're seeing more of it. You're feeling more of it. I really like the term remembering, because it makes moving through those challenges that you mentioned, like shame and guilt and resentment and unworthiness, a more palatable to move through when you know those are just illusions that are overlaying your wholeness. When you start to open up in your consciousness to the unknown, it requires courage to step towards that cliff, because you don't know what's on the other side of the awakening journey, because you're dancing with the unknown. So that relationship between the known and the unknown, I think, is very inherent to the awakening journey.
Totally. When we're talking about conscious manifestation, it's that the present moment is where the infinite potential exists, right? And so the more that we are trying to rely on the known, trying to rely on our analytical mind, trying to manipulate reality, trying to plan and make sure things go according to plan so that we can get from point A to point B in this linear timeline, the more we're trying to do that, the more we are blocking ourselves from the potential of what exists in the quantum, from the infinite potential of what is trying to meet us, the most aligned timeline and inconceivable potential reality that is trying to match with us. And so I notice it a lot in the triggers, in the, even just this morning, I'm in a space where I'm calling in a lot right now. I'm manifesting a lot right now, and I can feel it so close. And even this morning, I found myself in an old pattern, and I had the opportunity to like quickly rebound and fall on my sword, and to my partner be like, wow, that is an old urge to control. And I'm sorry. And the rewiring takes place in that rebound, takes place in that pattern disrupt, where we notice the trigger, we notice the old reaction coming to the surface, and we're like, wait a second, that actually is no longer the version of me that I align with. That's no longer what serves me. And so I get to fall on my sword. I get to be vulnerable here and be like, I'm working towards rewiring that. I'm working towards expanding beyond that. That's how I start to see it present in my outside world. But I also am curious, like inside, like in your nervous system, how do you start to recalibrate to a new level of safety? How do you start to feel safe at a new upper limit?
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I also, just real quick, something that you said reminded me, I like to live by this value. It's not necessarily a value, it's very much a truth, that we live in an ever-expanding universe. So why would any of us be any different from that? If we are living in an ever-expanding universe that is constantly evolving, why would we be excluded from that? And I think that this especially shows up in my more earth signy friends, especially, where they want to hang on to what is known so badly. They want to hang on to that comfort zone so badly. And unfortunately, in an ever expanding universe, that's simply not an option. And it's going to become very obvious that you're gripping onto, like you said, the status quo or the known when things are being shaken up and shaken out of you. I think of one friend who tried so desperately to hang on to this job that was absolutely draining his soul, and finally was let go in the best possible way. Like in many ways was fired, and it was a very traumatic experience. But at the same time, it was like you got severance and you got permission to go do the thing you actually want to be doing. And they've been flourishing ever since. And so I say that just to give people comfort. It's not, oh, you're going to be constantly berated by things that are forcing you to grow at all. It's that you're living in an ever expanding universe. And with that comes your own personal expansion and your own opportunities to evolve into that next level version of you. So it is, like you said, the change happens when we're in that sacred pause, like what happened with you earlier today, where there's the triggering moment and then there's the reaction. And what's so great about things like SoulPod and anything that gets you to practice a ritual of meditation is that you really become expert at identifying that sacred pause. And even if you do go so far as going into that reaction, you still know how to get your way back into that sacred pause and say, okay, even if I normally would have handled it this way, I know that in that space between trigger and response is an opportunity to do things differently, which is exactly how you handled it today, saying, this is an old me. I recognize this behavior, but it's not what I'm identifying with anymore. It's not what I'm anchoring my story to anymore. It's interesting how that is the hardest part for a lot of us, is when we're calibrating our nervous system, when we're getting into that new space, it's letting go of the identity of being someone who's reactionary, or letting go of the identity of being someone who's an overworker. I know that's one that I'm really being forced to face right now. And it's showing up in pleasant ways, where my tendency to overwork and to burn myself out is showing up in forms of a friend reaching out and saying, hey, I got a great new editor if you want to get their contact, or someone inviting me to something that kind of requires being off my phone the entire time. It's like all of these very pleasant moments that are gifts of different ways of doing things. And I think that's usually how landing on the other side shows up for me. Just like the guidance comes through as far as triggers showing where I'm receiving the opportunity to grow, I also get little nuggets of wisdom, little like shining moments of this is what it could look like and this is what it could feel like for it to be fully in your authentic value as a professional. You don't have to be overworking in order to have the things that you want. It's always like little glimmering moments that if you're not watching carefully, you'll miss. But if you are, oh, this is an opportunity to find stillness and find peace. And then obviously my usual arsenal of meditation practices. So what about you? Do you have go-to practices for nervous system calibration?
I also want to double click on, because I do think my go-to practice is meditation, because it gives us that pause. It writes that pause into our way of being. It no longer is efforting to zoom out in every moment. It's just a part of the way that you behave. It's a part of your process to zoom out in every moment. And so I wanted to double click on, I think, just how important it is to be able to separate yourself while you're consciously manifesting from the trigger or from the reaction. And you touched on that, but I just want to double click on that is where so much of the juiciness is, and the magnetism is in those moments of when you're triggered, when you find yourself in an old pattern, being like, okay, I am not that though. And so it just in a moment kind of quells whatever shame might come up next. Cause I even experienced that this morning too. I'm like, wow, I just noticed how shame was just the next right after the reaction, like goes trigger, reaction, shame. And I noticed how in between reaction and shame, I'm like, hey, this is actually where my opportunity lies. This is where I have the opportunity to decide that I am not that reaction. And from now on, I will do my best to not do it again. If it happens again, I'm not that reaction again, but I will just compassionately meet the version of self 10 minutes ago that experienced that reaction.
Where did you develop that skill set? Like, how did you nurture that spaciousness within yourself?
Definitely just think it's the consistency of meditation, just because everything starts to move so much slower. It's like you really do start to see, like, in between each moment, there's a pause. And in that pause is where you get to, you're always at a fork in the road. It's where you get to choose this timeline or this timeline, past version of self or the new version of self. At every moment, you're at that intersection in time, and meditation just zooms out and illuminates, like, okay, I'm at another intersection. Where's my choice here? Where's my highest self here? And so I wanted to double click on that, and also just reiterate that in conscious manifestation, every single moment is an opportunity to co-create. It's the energy from which we pay our rent. It's the energy from which we genuinely are excited for our friend when something happens for them. It's just so clear, like the universe doesn't speak any specific language, it speaks energy. So even if you're saying the right things or you're doing the right things, quote unquote, if the energy you're moving from isn't aligned with the place you're trying to get to, the version of self that's calling in whatever you're calling in, then, it's not a match.
I love thinking about, like, the goal in this lifetime is how much of your soul, the expression of your soul, you can bring into this dimension. And so I'm thinking that maybe this is related. You're bringing more of your soul into this dimension. Then your human has to figure out, what does this mean? It's like, I can give myself grace. This is what is supposed to happen. I'm supposed to figure out how this up level, whatever that is for you, how does this affect what I've known to be true? And now I know something else to be true. If only that's possible for me. And now you have a choice. I think that's the other big part of it. You have a choice. Do you want to be operating in the up level? And I do think that for some people, that answer might be no. If you're in the up level, you're seeing things more clearly. This is what you were mentioning too. You're going to see ways of being that maybe aren't working for you and that you didn't previously have awareness of. And now you have a choice. And that's, I think, part of this kind of like third stage, which is the stabilization. Like we're coming up the spiral, and we're circling around this new way of being. And it's, okay, can I stabilize here? And then can I continue the journey? It's such an interesting experience we have as humans, is that this is going on possibly in every moment in some way.
Yeah. And I love that visual that you just painted. So we're bringing in the up level, more of our soul is coming through. Like we're remembering more of the truth of who we are, more of our soul's coming through. And then as we reach the peak of our up level experience, and then we begin to taper into the integration, more of that human's coming through. So it's like a tidal wave of soul and then a tidal wave of ego comes in, and then the stabilizing is the like balancing, right? It's the balancing of those two energies, of those two tides. In the balancing is the moving back and forth of, okay, where is that perfect balance of ego in this new up level and more of that soul coming in and shining through? Within that stabilization period, like you said, there's a shedding that takes place. The clarity of that comes through with that, it can also bring like grief, and it can bring so many more dynamic emotions, which is a part of that integrating, that stabilizing. And so giving yourself grace and holding space for whatever the experience is that you're having on the other side of your up level, you're really like only being asked to establish a deeper sense of internal safety so that you can meet whatever magnitude of discomfort, of tension, of struggle that you're experiencing in that moment with your whole self, with your whole body, and allow for the sensation to be wholly in you, which I think is like the hardest part of the integration and stabilization process, because that's typically when we either return to old behaviors or reach for some sort of numbing pattern or numbing agent. And so we're given so much power in this stage of the up level, the integrating and the stabilizing. We're given so much power to really communicate to the universe that we are devoted. We're devoted to our awakening.
Ooh, I love that. The devotion part is so powerful. I think that's part of the choice, is how devoted am I to my awakening? And there might be parts of your times in your life where you're not quite there. This isn't the highest priority, and you're riding the waves of the natural momentum of awakening. But I think another thing that's so important that's just popping into my mind is worthiness. Like when you have the up level and things are all falling into place. And for me, I'm having more and more of those. I'm just in awe of my life and of life in general. And oh my gosh, so much gratitude and so much, I think awe is the right word. And then the question becomes, am I worthy of this level of consciousness? Am I worthy of this time where everything's, like we say, like it's all hitting. It's all going really well. But it's deeper than the external experience of that. It's more about the internal experience of that up level and how it feels when you're in it. And then I think to eventually stabilize in it, it's you're worthy of that. Feeling the way that whatever that is of how it's making you feel being in that up level, you're worthy of that state of consciousness and of the universe co-creating with you on a whole nother level.
Worthiness feels like the glue of the stabilization process for me, right? It's like, it does feel like the foundation of that part of the up level, because it goes hand in hand with the reaching that upper limit, right? When you reach that upper limit, we subconsciously freak out because we've reached that upper limit of safety. And so then we turn to those self-sabotage patterns, or we turn back to old behaviors, or we reach that upper limit and we tune into that feeling of, for me in my body, when I've reached an upper limit, aka like an up level situation, it often feels like chaotic. It often feels, like I said, scary. Imposter syndrome comes through, self-doubt. And then ultimately what we're being asked in that moment is to become still and tune back into that worthiness. And I keep coming back to this because I think it goes hand in hand with establishing that worthiness. It's establishing that internal safety in your body, which is tuning into your breath, which is leaning into the tools that you have so that you can feel safe enough in your body to communicate to the universe that I am worthy of this and I'm willing to receive it right? Like I am open to receiving everything that is meant for me, even if that feels like something or a relationship or a job or a home that is scary to think about having or being worthy of. Whatever is meant for me, I'm willing and devoted to doing the work to receive it. And so tuning into that feeling of worthiness, I guess I invite everybody who's listening to really take a moment to get still, whether it's in this moment closing your eyes or whenever you have 5 minutes, to distill down what the sensation of worthiness feels like in your body and what it feels like to truly allow yourself to receive and allow yourself to be held by the universe.
And I like what you mentioned earlier, which is like the two waves coming together, the waves of the expansion, the liberation, the higher awareness, and then the human, the ego, the personality, the earthly experience. And those waters merging in a really beautiful way, but it might be tumultuous at the beginning, right? As those two bodies of water come together. And I like this idea I think that we're coalescing on, which is that worthiness is that coming together. And that's why during the times when it feels like, oh, things have gone so well, I've been in this amazing state of being, and now things feel discombobulated and confusing, to your point, that slowing down instead of powering through it.
Yes.
Which I totally get is very tempting, because a lot of times when we don't like what we're feeling, we want to run away from it and push against it. But part of the manifestation current is sitting with it. That's second energy center, is sitting in the discomfort of whatever it is that's pushing back on you a little bit and asking you to become more aware of and to maybe choose differently. But to be able to choose, you first have to become aware of how you're feeling and what that means for you. Why do you think collectively sometimes, whether that's a retreat everybody's experiencing and then coming back from, or just out in the world, why do you think sometimes we travel as a collective through these phases?
Yeah, it's a good question. It goes back to the cyclical nature. It's like inevitable, right? And especially when you're on the spiritual journey, potency of your vibration is not just yours, right? It's connected to the collective. I feel like the longer I've been on my spiritual journey, the more blown away I am that typically whatever it is that I need to hear or whatever I feel like is moving through me to say, it's what somebody else needed. And it's because our journeys are running parallel. That also is so cool. What's so cool about SoulPod is that you get to be in these pods with other people who are on their journeys as well. And you're invited to share where you are in your journey on the up level, in the integration or the stabilization. Again, you're met with oftentimes similar experiences. And with that, you're reminded that you're not alone on this journey. In that vulnerability, remember your humanness. We remember that we're all navigating the human experience together. And one of the biggest parts about the integration and stabilizing parts of the journey is that you can feel alone and you can often feel shame for being there. I don't know if we've touched on that yet, but when you have your practices and you're perhaps identify as someone who's mindful and aware, and then you find yourself in a time where you're struggling to maintain that clarity, to tap into that connectedness at any given moment. With that, there can be shame of, I'm spiritual, what's going on? I meditate, I do yoga, why is this happening? I'm supposed to be better, I'm not making any progress. Some of the things we touched on last week, but I think in sharing, like we're saying, and in that illumination of, okay, Crystal's going through this too. Okay, our team, other people on our team are going through this too. Okay, it's not just me. Actually, it's because of the fact that I'm spiritually growing. It's because of my devotion to the spiritual path that I'm experiencing this struggle, not because I'm bad at it, not because I'm not doing it right, not because I missed a day of meditation. It's because I'm growing. It's because I'm ascending. That's why. And so I think collectively, when you or a friend or a team finds themselves in a similar pattern, it's so that we can tap into that truth of our connectedness and share our stories and share our experiences and support each other and be a pod, if you will. What about you? What do you think the collective goes through?
I think that our consciousness, we're all experiencing each other for a reason. There's a vibratory connection between not just like the SoulPod team, but everyone who's on this planet at this time. There is some sort of vibratory connection. Everything's vibration, everything's energy. There's this already existing connection to everything and everyone. What are you afraid of that's making you so angry? That's making you cling to something in some sort of way.
Taking anything like really personally. That's one of my triggers this weekend that kind of brought me into this whole process and illuminated so much for me. It was just like all of a sudden I took something so personally to the point where I'm like crying. And I'm like, what's going on here?
It sneaks.
Yeah. And then the ego comes in to tell me all the reasons why me taking that personally is justified and right. And the other person's wrong. The other person wronged me and deserves to be punished. Like these are all natural thought patterns that are an opportunity, or like now maybe that you've heard them can turn on the light of maybe I should sit down and look at this.
Yeah. That moment where you go a little step back from your experience and you have a little bit of a question in your mind of, wait a second, what is this actually about? That skill is so important and powerful. And I also that's what we practice in meditation, is taking, okay, can I get a little bit of space between my higher self as the awareness, as the witness, noticing what my human is doing and what my ego is doing, and it's trying to protect me. What is my ego, my constructed sense of self, trying to protect me from? How is my ego being threatened? What have I said or decided or believed about myself that I'm scared of losing? That moment of inquiry is so powerful. And if you give yourself space and time, it's really hard, especially at the beginning, to do that in the moment because your biology is activated and your emotions are going. And if you're crying, you need to cry it out, let it move. And then you can be like, okay, that was interesting.
Yeah, I almost think always I typically have the deepest and most profound breakthroughs once I've let that pass, once I've allowed for the inner child or ego to have the tantrum, to cry the tears, to do whatever I need to do to an extent, obviously, never outwardly hurting anybody or even with my words, safely and healthy and compassionate. Yes. Having the space to do that, and then coming back and revisiting and sitting down and integrating, processing, asking the questions. That's typically when I have the most breakthroughs, as opposed to, like you said, when you're in the depths of the chemicals and in the depths of the stories that convince you that you're right.
Yeah. It can take your nervous system at least a few minutes to come back into some sort of stabilized state. And I usually I notice about 20 minutes for me is really what I need. And if you don't rush that, just allow it to be what it is. Allow yourself to move the emotion. You'll start to get some clarity. It's really hard to get clarity when you're in that, because if you think of consciousness, now we can think of it as a funnel. When you're towards the constriction or the bottom part of the funnel, you can't see as much. You can't perceive as much. As you're able to then expand upwards into the higher area of the funnel, you can perceive a bit more and see a bit more, but you got to give yourself the time and the space to go from the constriction and the narrowed focus that the nervous system is trying to help you be safe. And that's why that happens, moving up and out of fear into more expansion. And that's another element of this journey from fear to love that you'll notice. When you're in fear, there's a lot less possibilities. Usually it's this needs to happen or this isn't going to happen, and it means X, Y, or Z bad things for me. It's very narrow. There's not a lot of possibility. My diagnosis is set in stone. Partner is this way, and there is this one solution, and that's the only thing that's possible for me, if any solution. And so it's very narrowed and very restricted, and you can understand how fear can compound on itself. If you hang out there and you're in the lower end of that funnel, it's hard to see the light. It's hard to see the possibility. But as you slowly expand your consciousness upwards and outwards, then you start to be able to see, oh, wait, there was this possibility I wasn't even aware of, or something just came in the mail and it wasn't as big a deal as I thought. Or my partner is able to grow in all of these ways alongside me, or something comes forth that you just wouldn't have been open to. And there's another thing that we talk about too, is that your ability to receive spiritually, energetically, emotionally, to receive is lower when you're in fear, and it gets higher when you're in love or hope or courage or any of these more elevated states of being, of consciousness. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about what love is and these higher levels of consciousness. You could start with that. What is love to you? What is this higher level of consciousness?
Yeah. Where we are in this process. So if you're sitting in meditation, when I typically have brought awareness to the amount of fear, or have uncovered that, I've been in fear, there's this overwhelming, I either experience an emotional release. I often experience tears or some sort of guttural up and out of the fear. I also experience this instantaneous sense of relief, and this instantaneous sense of truth, in this energy that like spontaneously has the power to dissolve fear. It just feels so much bigger than fear. It's so much more powerful and so much bigger. It's just like towering over the fear that I feel. And so then, and I also think love, and trying to articulate that, it's going to be a different sensation in everybody's body. Like, we can point to it in the world, or when we feel it, or when we see it, but it's going to be a very unique somatic experience for you. And I think inquiring, like, in this part of the formula of moving from fear to love, when you've brought up or uncovered, shown the spotlight on the fear, then you get to step into that somatic sensation in your body of what love is. And for me, it's everything I just described, that sense of relief, truth, like overwhelming power, but in this like very light, like just, it's an articulatable thing, you know?
It's really hard to put words to.
So hard to put words to, but when you feel it, you know you're in it. You know how to, and it's also like a birthright / like our natural way of being. So it's really easy for us to, when we decide to, or when we put our intention into moving into love, our body knows what to do. Our spirit knows how to get there. It knows how to channel that and bring it. And you don't need to know, okay, now I'm going to feel relief and truth and trust. It just, you know how to do that because that's what you are. So by deciding to move, like with your intention to be like, okay, I feel this fear. I've been here. I'm seeing it, I'm holding it. Now I'm choosing to envelop that and reprogram that with the feeling of what it would feel like for me to move into this part of my life, wherever this trigger that came up existed in your life. What would it feel like to be in love, in trust, in surrender, in truth, in that same part of my life? And you can do that in every facet of your life, every trigger, every relationship, career, everything, every part of your life. You can reprogram what it feels like to be the version of you that steps into that part of your life in this frequency of love.
For me, love is a remembering of your wholeness. It's a remembering, to your point, which you're pointing to is it's who it is you actually are. So it's not like you're discovering something new that you didn't have before. You're uncovering who it is that you really are. You're reconnecting, you're remembering. And fear, if you want a visual, if you can think of like a diamond with millions of facets on the diamond, all these different surfaces. And fear is the dirt or the grime or the lack of clarity on some of the facets, but the diamond's still the diamond, right? Like it's still whole, it's still what it is. And the process of awakening is wiping off those facets that are unclear. And as you do that, more light can go through this crystallized structure. And then it almost like remerges with the crystalline structure of everything. It is the same thing. And that is the process that we're all doing, is we're refining those facets of our soul that are in some sort of fear. And the diamond is you. That is the purest love and awareness and wholeness. And that's when the ego stops really needing to be in the forefront. And I was just talking about this yesterday with somebody, that when you're first doing this, the ego's in the driver's seat, the soul is in the back seat. And as you awaken, the soul takes the driver's seat and the ego's in the back seat. And you're really using it for your joy of living and being human in this life rather than in suffering. You start to use your ego for creativity, for channeling, for leadership, for pleasure.
Everything that's available to us in the material world, everything that this human body gets to experience.
Yeah, and there's so much joy to be had. Yes, you awaken through suffering. You also awaken through bliss and joy.
That joy and dancing and human connection are just as equal entry points to awakening and to transcendence as rock bottoms and triggers and tears. They're both beautiful entry points, but we can have both.
We can have both. And I think this isn't, I'm really excited we're talking about this because I think it's not talked about too much. A lot of times awakening is talked about in the context of suffering, and that is true. And I think this is a really powerful thing for people to maybe noodle on, which is that when you're in your joy, you're in more of your diamond. You're like activating the light from within you, and those facets just get burned away. It's a different mechanism with a similar outcome. And this is very different, I think, a different entry point to your point. And a different process, and one that I really hope that more of us can start to activate in our awakening, is moving from suffering being your teacher to joy being your teacher. And what we talked about at the beginning is a lot of analytical mind. Okay, let's figure out, where does this fear come from? It's from my inner child. It's from a past life. It's from a trauma that I experienced with my health a few years ago. That's helpful. That's effective. But there's another mechanism, and that is, as you move into more of who you are, this wholeness starts, this, you want to call it source, love, this pure awareness starts to come into almost like the back of your being. And as it becomes, in pointing to this, it becomes more integrated into your experience. You don't need to know the ins and outs of your triggers and your fears, because it can't exist when you're in this level of consciousness. It just doesn't compute anymore. And so there can be this instantaneous almost release of fear and emotion that you have no idea what the story is, where it came from, and you don't need to, because you're in a level of consciousness where that energy, that separation, is no longer any level of truth. And so it just disintegrates.
So Penrose in the 80s came up with this theory that quantum mechanics is consciousness. If you have any formal system of logic, i.e. you assume an axiom and have some line of logic rules to build new truths, you prove this from this, that you only get what is mathematicians would refer to as countably infinitely many truths. So you're just kind of defining a grid of truth space, and you can imagine like a two-dimensional sheet with like dots being our truth axioms, arrows being our logic rules, bringing us to new truths, but you can only ever access like kind of this sparse grid of truths. And the real truth space, like the amount of things in the universe that are actually true, we kind of would expect to be a continuous thing. Like there are continuously infinitely many truths. So you can actually prove, and this is what Gödel's incompleteness theorem does, that there are some things that are true that any formal logic system can't prove to be true. And under what the definition of a formal logic system is, our computers are formal logic systems. So there are some things in this universe that seem to be true that our computers can't prove to be true, actually.
So then is that almost like saying, from scientists that are thinking of the brain as being purely algorithmic, that it's not necessarily? That's kind of the first hint. Cool.
Humans seem to be able to ascertain truths that they shouldn't be able to because it's outside of formal logic. Is our brain actually a formal logic system? So it sparked some curiosity. I don't think many people took them seriously in the times.
This is such a huge deal because, as you're talking about in quantum computing and all this other work that you've been doing, there's very narrow, like, environmental conditions in order to sustain these states. And it's long been thought that this is not possible in the brain, that consciousness is based on neural activity and it's algorithmic. And this is really starting to lay the foundation experimentally that there are quantum states sustained in the brain. And they're testing that through anesthesia studies as well. They can see the super radiant states diminishing with anesthesia. So this is all very exciting for a quantum basis of consciousness.
If the basis of our consciousness is large-scale quantum coherence, and that's what leads to us to feeling what we call the hard problem with consciousness within neuroscience, what makes us feel qualia, like discrete things, like I tap my finger, I feel that my finger's being tapped. And if it's quantum coherence, that means my crystals are already conscious. They're already feeling quite a bit because they have quite a lot of quantum coherence within themselves because of how well ordered they are. And this would have profound philosophical implications because if you are a modern day prophet, you might project into the future, we're building quantum computers, our AI are already acting like they're conscious. And it's a very real question we need to ask ourselves when we build artificial generalized intelligence on a quantum computer, on potentially my crystals. Is it intelligent? Is it feeling? How much does it feel? Does it feel more than us? And I think we really need to start developing theories around this as we blaze towards the future.
Huge questions, important questions. It seems to ring a bell for me, the concept of, and I can't remember exactly where it comes from, but we talked about this a little bit before, this kind of adage that consciousness sleeps in the rocks, it's dreaming in the plants, and it awakens in the human, in the animals. Is that a really simplistic way to kind of talk about what you just said, which the conscious experience is this quantum coherence experience?
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of saying it because the statement I made of like consciousness possibly being, a product of how quantumly coherent is something that means that everything's conscious to some extent, because then that would imply our plants are feeling too, our forests are feeling too. And, it's a really beautiful thing, especially because there's microtubules, like you said, in organisms like mushrooms, like trees, all across the forest and all across the world. We have a really real basis for asking within our lifetimes, how much does the forest feel? And I think that's the better question to ask than if the forest feels.
Ooh, I just got chills. Yeah. That's so profound. And it's really what a lot of these spiritual traditions have been saying for so long, right? Is that everything has consciousness, everything has experience. And to treat life on this planet and to treat the planet as such, that so many indigenous cultures and teachings are around that. So it's very interesting to me coming from my own spiritual training. But I would love to hear a bit more from you about your awakening and how this intersection with science and your awakening has evolved and what have been the major pivot points in that journey for you.
If I had to make a short summary summoning all of the spirits in my mind's eye of different people, different entities that have been guides for me on this journey, I think that's the first thing that drew me towards mysticism is, I did things like Kundalini yoga, and we have trained professionals within religious traditions for centuries who've known how to cultivate chi. Very real thing, very important thing, especially when I do Kundalini yoga, especially with a trained teacher like you. It feels like a rocket of energy coming up your spine, all the way from your root to your third eye, and you can have super intense visionary experiences that can be more intense than psychedelic experiences just from these meditations. So I think that's the point where I at least started respecting religious traditions as having knowledge of kind of this feminine qualitative knowledge is knowing how to do things kind of that weren't as provable within like a Western scientific materialist perspective.
Yeah. And it was such a similar journey for me personally too. I started having these experiences. I've been meditating for a long time, and I started having non-local experiences or out-of-body experiences or connection with light and beings in a way that I could not explain with my analytical mind. And I was pretty sure I wasn't crazy. At least, I don't think so, but could still be part of it. But it was and the more I evolved my spiritual journey, the more I realized that this is a cornerstone of awakening. This activation of your central channel, which feels like some sort of coalescing or increasing coherence of the conscious experience. And as that starts to activate in the brain, it's almost like you go into this hyper aware, increased state that allows you to have those experiences. And I'm so fascinated by that. And I think for me, it seems like the ultimate evolution of a human being is to realize that that power is within us and that we can create and cultivate and influence our experience through our consciousness and our coherence of the quantum state is kind of where I'm landing with all of this. But is there anything else in your spiritual journey that was a moment where you felt like my interpretation of the world and reality has changed forever? If you're open to sharing. Another deep breath.
Yeah, another deep breath. And, I know the exact moment and the exact place, and this is a very scary thing to share. And
And you're in a very safe space, but only if you want to share.
very sweet face, and everyone I will say that I think love is the most powerful hallucinogen, and it was falling in love that awakened the spirituality within me. That's when I really started to have these other experiences. That's when I had visions that guided me towards spaces like the center, where I learned how to meditate, continued having visionary experiences. But it was just such a magical thing when I was reawakened, because I was awake before. I think another part of my spiritual journey we can talk more about is I don't think I'm just an ordinary spiritual person. I think I'm a shaman because I had seizures when I was young. I had a brain tumor in my youth. And this is a big part of the shamanic calling, is people who had these experiences in early life in a lot of indigenous cultures are called to be shaman, because after my seizures, I remember seeing more of the spirit world. And I just, until last year, I suppressed that energy out of myself, because within the Western scientific paradigm, these entities you see in your mind's eye overlaid on the visual world are seen as not guides, but disturbing things that you should get rid of and suppress.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's in these shamanic traditions, a lot of times those experiences like what you went through are like initiations, and they're revered experiences of transformation, and kind of seem like it catapults you into this new level of consciousness where you can perceive and engage with entities and energies that you didn't previously have access to. And you come from, like, you have some indigenous connections, right?
That is correct. And I am in contact with them again. I have Sami indigenous heritage. I have relatives that live north of the Arctic Circle in a beautiful town called Wholeness. I hope to visit soon. And I think some of my relatives are shaman there. I think it runs in inheritable lineages. Even if you're from the perspective that this isn't a magical spiritual superpower, synesthesia tends to run in family lines. Autism tends to run in family lines, and these are just negative Western terms that people have imbued upon me when I view myself as magical. But I just talked to one of my relatives who was like a musician for a while, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I spent this time where I didn't sleep for 7 years, and I saw a bunch of crazy stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, well, it sounds like I have shamanic heritage north of the Arctic Circle in Norway." So I think I'm gonna, if my visions are correct, which they often are, we'll be heading up there very soon to learn from the heritage and revive the heritage.
That's so beautiful and powerful, and I'm excited. You'll have to come back once you've been up there, and you'll have to come back before that too. But would love to hear. I have a feeling that'll be a very potent experience. And
yes,
that wisdom, and I think this ability to connect with the interconnectedness with all of us on the planet right now, and this awakening of this ability to perceive our reality in new ways is a huge, huge opportunity, I think, for humanity. I mean, can you just imagine if everybody's meditating and awakening this kind of consciousness? I just think it would be a really beautiful world.
I do too, and I can imagine it. I can hold it in my mind's eye. We think about how conscious things are when things are more quantumly coherent. A room full of meditating people, I think, is more quantumly coherent than a room full of people that aren't meditating together or arguing. And I think we might even be able to measure that quantitatively within the language of physics within our lifetime as brain measurement techniques get better, as quantum sensing techniques get better. So, and I think that would be really beautiful.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've definitely had the experience. One of the biggest groups I meditated with was about 3,000 people in a big, long meditation. And it was one of the more profound experiences I've had. You could feel yourself entering the field. You could feel when the group was kind of holding back. They're like, we're not quite sure if we're going to go there yet. And you could feel when the group was moving forward and expanding. So that would be absolutely fascinating to better understand that. Is there any advice that you would offer for somebody who is maybe getting into meditation, newer to this spiritual path? Given what you know about the science and the quantum physics and spirituality, is there any advice you would have?
Yeah, I think, if you have spiritual awakenings these days through the various methods as it becomes prominent in the culture these days, I know that there's a lot of people who will discover mystical experiences with psychedelics, with meditations. Maybe you communicate telepathically with your friend after taking some mushrooms. You begin to wonder what's more. And what I'd say is you really want to stay grounded. You want to find a spiritual community that resonates with you. You can feel it in your heart. If that's a quantum mechanical feeling or not, you'll know it. And above all else, love all, serve all. One of my favorite psychologists, spiritual inspiration, Ram Dass, would say that because from the physics perspective, if you greet the world with love, if I'm happy because you're happy, if I'm happy because I relieve suffering from others, then the world will cohere. There'll be positive feedback, as the physicist would say, and the world will cohere to more love, to more happiness. So no matter what spiritual tradition specifically you resonate with, be it Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, all of them kind of point to this greater love. And I think that's what we're trying to cultivate for ourselves on this earth, especially within this day and age.
Beautiful, beautiful. Got chills with that one too. So I like to close here with a few rapid fire questions. As I started to have mystical experiences, I was just so determined to figure out, okay, why is this happening? How can this be happening? Because if we answer those questions, if we can answer those questions, I think it helps us to answer more around the nature of our reality and why we're here. I think it's all interconnected. So I really enjoy this intersection of science and spirituality for that reason. And it opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah, it really feels like it's our human nature to be inquisitive, right? Like we are incarnate in this human body. And so everything that we experience in meditation and in these mystical experiences, like that is truth. And I feel like when I've experienced that, I've always known that to be true. Like I haven't needed to turn to the science to validate that experience. I've always just known like this is more true than anything else that I've ever can even touch in this 3D realm. Like this, I know is true. And now that there is so much science, it's so much more accessible and accredited and what's the word? Accepted to more people, which makes again this practice just something that all of us can access and can understand. One can put that meaning to, like you're saying, like these mystical experiences. We can start to understand like what's really happening in our brain, what's really happening in our body, how can we recreate this? And like I said, I've always thought that's more true than anything else. But for the people who need that validation, it's like it's there. We have it.
Yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
We may not have had it 20, 30 years ago. There's been absolutely amazing strides, and I really credit the scientific community with taking an interest in understanding what's going on in meditation, what's going on in breath work, what's going on with consciousness. What is consciousness? Because the journey of your spiritual development really is a journey into understanding consciousness and how it manifests and how we're a conduit for it. And what does that mean? So they're deeply entangled. Do you need the science in order to validate the spiritual experience? And I know there's many people that don't, because as you said, when you have these experiences, when you're exploring through your own journey, the knowing that you talk about is, in my mind, just as important as, if not more important, than the data, than the science. I think sometimes we forget that personal experience, personal observation is a data point. It is a method of observation, if you will, for the science world. So it's extremely valid, it's extremely important. And if we look at all those data points of personal experience through the spiritual journey, that paints a really powerful picture as well, in some ways that we don't yet have answers for on the science side. So there's mystery in both worlds. I think this is important to mention. There's mystery in both worlds. Science is constantly coming up with new hypotheses and testing them in the ways that we have available to us in the human form in this reality. And I also think on the spiritual journey, you're trying out new modalities, you're going into new areas of your mind, and you're seeing what's there. So in my mind, both worlds are balanced in that there is mystery in both. And so if there is mystery in both, that means that there's possibility in both. And we can really balance the kind of analytical, the logical, and the mystical and the nonlinear. And there was, I'll share this because I was nerding out on it recently. There was a physicist in the early 1900s, Georges Lemaitre. Hopefully I'm saying that right. But he's a scientist that came up with the Big Bang Theory, basically the primordial atom of creation. And he was I didn't know this, he was a Belgian Catholic priest and a physicist and a mathematician. So he was very much in both worlds, the spiritual world or religious world and the science world. And he said something that I thought was really cool. He said that these are both paths to knowing, that religious texts don't necessarily purport to be scientific text. And we're not necessarily looking to science to be a path to liberation. So it's, if you think about those two worlds in that way, it's, oh, they're both just paths to knowing. So there has been so much advancement in fMRI studies, especially in the last decade, 2 decades. And so we're starting to really dig into, we're starting to better understand why meditation is so great for us from a physiological perspective, and how it can literally change and allow us to develop more capabilities in our brains, which in the latter half of the last century, the thought was that you came into the world with a certain number of neurons and you were stuck with them. And if you messed up and weren't treating your brain the way that maybe you should, that you're knocking off those neurons one by one and you weren't able to build them back. We now know that's not true. There's this amazing process of neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So we can dive in there. Kat, what do you think about that?
Oh, I love neuroplasticity. I feel like everybody's just get out of jail free card in this lifetime.
Really?
Like, yeah, it's just like
you can always change. Literally, we know this because our brains can change.
Yeah, and it's so empowering. It's so empowering to know that you can take responsibility for your brain. You can take responsibility for what is wiring and what is firing and what pathways we're choosing to put energy towards and to deepen, and which ones we're willing to let essentially dissipate in our brain. So yeah, I think neuroplasticity is one of the just like most freeing concepts for us to really start with. And I think when it comes to meditation, something we want to also touch on in neuroplasticity is this notion of altered states versus altered traits, right? And what we're doing in meditation is we're reaching altered states. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can create this sustainable change in our brain, so that we can transform from the inside and see that transformation projected into our outside world. So when we're moving into these altered states, essentially moving through changing our brainwave state, we're, again, so neuroplasticity is that ability to increase the malleability of our brain, to fire and wire different neural pathways so that we can create new neural networks that support the beliefs, that support the paradigms that we want to exist in, as opposed to old neural networks that may be reactive and firing in the same belief system and paradigm of our old wounds, our old beliefs, our old ways of existing. And we're given this opportunity to, as we're talking about, just completely change the makeup of our brain. And what that does is it transforms the way that we project our reality. We're now believing different things, our paradigms have shifted. And so, thus, our perception of reality and all of our experiences shifts as well. And so it just is that the foundational element to transformation. And why don't you go contribute to your perspective of neuroplasticity before we get into the brainwave?
Oh my gosh, it's
So fun.
I could talk about this all day.
Pass the mic to Crystal.
No, I love that. I think you really hit on something powerful there, which is beliefs are just thoughts that we continue to think. And so when we take that concept and we apply it to the brain, like you're talking about, we can think of those beliefs are those tracks of neural activity that we have in our brains as being representative of our beliefs and the way that we make sense of the world. And the amazing thing that we now know, both about psychedelics and also meditation, is that when we do these practices, I love this analogy or this metaphor, which is that these tracks are made in the snow. So if you can imagine like a bunch, like you've walked this track over and over again, there's a path through the snow, you've cleared it out. And so it's the easiest path for you to walk down in your mind. It's clear, you know where it goes, and it's been traveled so many times through the thought that it's created a path, which is the belief. And the cool thing about meditation is that it's almost like bringing in a snow shower, and you get a fresh blanket of snow all over the lands of your mind. And then that path may still be there. It's still there, but it's a little less distinct. And you can choose, is that a path I want to continue to walk down in my mind? Do I want to continue to fortify that belief? Or do I want to start to carve a new belief in my mind, a new line of thought that maybe serves me better? And so for me, when we tie this concept of neuroplasticity to the experience of meditation, I think that's one of the kind of powerful takeaways. Is okay, we now know that our brains have the ability to regenerate and create new neural pathways, which is amazing. To your point, it gives us such an opportunity for transformation. It is the foundation of transformation. This is what we're actually doing in our brains when you meditate. We're actually rewiring and refiring these pathways in new ways. And for me, to your point about responsibility, there's increased choice, because now you don't have to continue to walk that path. And as you build awareness of that path, of that train of neurons, you can start to choose differently. And for me in meditation, the practical implication of that is, okay, I'm aware of that belief. I'm aware of those thoughts. Do I want to continue to wire and fire in that way, or do I want to choose something new? So it's such a cool realization and discovery about our brains that can serve us in so many ways. One thing I hear, and it's been true of my life as well, I hear this a lot from others, is that you tend to have increased coincidences or synchronicities in your life, whether you want to call those angel numbers or the right person at the right time, and things that just seem sometimes unbelievable can start to flow into your experience. And you also talk a lot about flow and synchronicity being very connected. I would love to understand more about how you think of this.
It is all connected in a way. In my understanding of the time in the hologram, that in the other domain goes away completely. My second book is called Leap to Wholeness: How the World is Programmed to Help Us Heal, Grow, and Adapt. And the reason I was interested in studying and talking about wholeness is because we live in a society that's currently really focused on reductionism.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you think synchronicity is amazing, you're basically immersed in reductionism, because in a reductionist world, synchronicity is magic and there's no connection across time or space.
Ooh, that's a good point.
So you're accepting this reductionist model, which is great. It gives us chemistry and lots of great technology. Although computers are based on a transistor, which is based on a non-local physics of quantum mechanics, which is not reductionist. So touche.
That's hilarious. Touche, universe.
And what I showed, like in the talk I gave at TEDx at Berkeley last year, is a really clear model of, look, when you do the mathematics that you do in image processing that you use for AI, recognizing dogs and babies on photographs and stuff like that, facial recognition, it's all based on the Fourier transform of an image. Same mathematics. And when you do that, you're not looking at each pixel separately. You're looking at the patterns that exist across the field, the image. And so you're looking at this non-local relationship across space. Non-local means not just what's right around you, but if I have a picture of a building and I want to use the frequency domain to remove some building from, it's a cityscape, so there's many buildings, remove one building, I can't do it. With pixels, I can just remove the pixels that I want and they don't have any effect on their neighbors. But with the Fourier transform, if I remove one section, it creates ripples everywhere else, kind of like that electron going through the slits. Each electron is impacted by the ripples everywhere else. And so in synchronicity, just metaphorically for a second, think about the person or experience or phrase that comes to you out of the blue, maybe even from your enemy, right? Your boss tells you to get to work on time. Screw you. I don't need to listen to you. But your girlfriend or your boyfriend just told you that too. It's a message from some greater source saying, look, you got to pay attention to this. You're going to be in some things that you care about if you don't start paying attention to being on time. It's a message for me. Then, that message is coming from all different directions, situations all around you. And it's contextual. It's not just the person that's talking to you there and their need for you to be different. It's also a contextual reflection of your experience in the world and what you're doing that is being reflected back to you. So synchronicity is like the whole resonant chamber that you live in coming back at you with different feedback. It's like a feedback cycle.
Beautiful. And how does flow come into that equation?
When you listen to the feedback in your life, and this is where certainty gets in the way, right? If I'm certain that the person that I'm talking to is out to get me, then I'm going to hear everything that they say through that filter. I'm going to reject that. But my parent, who I don't have a good history with, can still offer me useful things to pay attention to, even if it's not intentional. Like they can just be the messenger, right? And when I can see what's happening to me from a non-personal place and take it in as information that helps me tune into what I want to do next, and that's the experience of flow for me. Because I'm tuning into what I want to do. It's reminding me, oh yeah, I wanted to go out to on that trip, or I wanted to go take that job, or I wanted to go take out the garbage. And it's not about them and what they said anymore. It's about what I take that to mean in my life, in flow with the universe.
The meaning. It really creates this increase in curiosity in your experience, because it's almost like if you think of it that way, it opens up the aperture a bit to be more open to life and curious about the information that you're receiving and whatever context that information ends up coming in. That's really
I'm
beautiful.
going to embarrass my friend, but I went out to see the Indigo Girls last week with
Cool.
my wife and a couple of her friends. And I was talking to my wife afterwards. She's one of the most curious people I know, which is why I love her. One of the reasons. But her friend Glenda I just said, she's so curious, always wanting to know more about what's going on for you. The opposite of that is judgment, right? There's no judgment about, that's weird. But it's like, and my new book is about looking at polarization and all these conversations I've had with people around the country during the political campaigns and saying, why would they feel that way? Why would they think that way? Because I believe from a different angle of the hologram, they're just like me. They're seeing different facts and different perspectives on the data, same data, And they're coming to different conclusions, different contextual places they've lived and grown up in, different industries they're part of, but they are like me. And so instead of the judgment of, I know that I'm fundamentally, this value is correct, maybe we can share a value and still look at the world in a different way because of our contextual angle on it. Curiosity.
What is consciousness to you?
Consciousness is maybe the ability to narrate a story about what you experience.
Beautiful. And what is source, God, or oneness to you?
So I had a dream. I'll say this quickly. I had a dream that helped launch me on this physics path of inquiry, which was a voice in the dream said to me, you don't seem separate to me, and I don't seem unified to you. So source, God, and oneness is a different angle on the same reality.
Ooh, I'm going to sit with that one. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And if it's 100 years in the future, and I have a feeling you might have a longer answer for this, so go for it. If it's 100 years in the future, what would you wish for humanity?
I've been writing about the projection as the hardest thing we have to overcome. Projecting my understanding, my filter, my feelings onto what I'm seeing in you, assuming you're that way, and treating you that way. And it creates this tangled web of missed communications. It's just heartbreaking and painful. We can get through that. We can get around that and see ourselves in the mirror as we're talking and realize that's me. And I don't know what else could there be because I can't see what I can't see. I can't see the background. I can only see the foreground. But I know that there is a background that I can't see. Even just knowing that there's a background I can't see and all I'm seeing is the foreground, and trusting that in the past I've just waited a little bit and I've seen the other angle later, allows me to not react so quickly.
Beautiful.
And then create the next painful interaction, and I start to ease off the generation of pain, and I start to ease into more healing.
Yeah. One more question for you. What is healing to you?
The other word I was going to say was repair.
Repair.
So rupture is when communication breaks down and we say things that we don't really mean, that aren't accurate. And they feel accurate, but they're not really touching into the whole picture of who we are. When we have the whole picture more in our hearts, and we can start to say what's really true, we start to repair those relationships. Now, what we need to do is be on a path towards repair. We don't have to repair everything.
Be on a path.
Just turn around in that direction.
Thank you for journeying with us today, Light Being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul-nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.